Welcome to our channel Folk Street Mystery, where every story begins in shadow and every clue goes under a single street lamp. Step inside. The next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now let's begin.
The Missing Minute That Solved the Murder. Genius Detective Story. Chapter 1. The Poisoned Pages. By 11 o'clock that Thursday morning, I had already decided the day was going to be spoiled. That wasn't prophecy, it was experience. Any day that began with Nero Wolfe refusing ham with his eggs because the slices had been cut too thin by Fritz was a day already limping. By the time I got back to the office after breakfast, he had installed himself in the chair behind his desk as if he had been poured into it, closed his eyes, and informed me that if anyone called who was not dead, dying, or prepared to pay in advance, I was to say he was unavailable. Meaning, I said, taking my place at my desk, that if they are dead, I should ask them to hold? His eyes stayed shut. Meaning, Archie, that your wit, like canned asparagus, is tolerable only in famine. That was Wolfe in a fair mood. The old brownstone on West 35th Street was behaving like itself, quiet, orderly, and faintly fragrant with the drift from the plant rooms upstairs, where 10,000 orchids were getting more attention than most citizens of New York. Fritz was ruling the kitchen, Theodore was ministering to the flowers, and Wolfe was guarding his schedule as if the Constitution depended on it. At 4, he would have beer. At 6, he would descend. At no point in the natural order of things would he stir farther than necessary. At 11:17, the doorbell rang. I went to the hall, opened the door, and found Inspector Kramer planted on the stoop, hat shoved back, jaw set, and eyes carrying the cheerful look he reserved for funerals, and Wolfe. "Good morning," I said. "You look like a man who has come either to arrest me or borrow money." "Phooey," he pushed past me. "Where is he?" "In there, ripening." Kramer marched to the office, and I followed. Wolfe opened his eyes when Kramer entered, took one look, and sighed from deep in his prosperous chest. "Mr. Kramer, your presence before noon is an offense against nature." "One of these days," Kramer growled, "nature will get even." He remained standing. Kramer always remained standing at first, as if sitting in Wolfe's office might concede too much. "A man died this morning, maybe murdered, maybe not. I want your ears open." Wolfe folded his hands over the yellow expanse of his vest. "Then speak into them." Kramer ignored that. "Name's Edwin Harlan, 56, collector, lived on East 62nd. On at around 9:30, he was in his library looking at some fancy special edition book just delivered to him. A maid heard a crash. She found him on the floor. Dead. I said, "Heart?" "The medical examiner hasn't signed anything yet." Kramer looked at me, then back to Wolfe. "Here's the odd part. The book was open beside him. The maid says he had been excited about it all week. A limited edition of some memoir that hasn't even hit the stores yet." Wolfe's eyes narrowed the fraction of an inch that meant maybe. People have died reading worse books. Save the jokes. Kramer took out a notebook, not to read from it, but to remind us he had facts. No signs of struggle, no one else in the room. Coffee untouched, windows closed. One thing more, his fingertips had a faint gray stain on them. That landed. Wolfe's lids lifted another millimeter. Ink? Maybe. Or something masquerading as ink, I said. Kramer shot me a glance. "That's why I'm here, wise guy. Harlan's secretary called us before the ambulance had even left. She says he got 3 telephone calls in the last 2 days, warning him not to open the book." There it was, the limp in the day turning into a broken leg. Wolfe grunted. "And she told the police this at once?" "Yes." "Then either she is honest or exceptionally intelligent," Wolfe said, both of which are comparatively rare. Before Kramer could answer, the bell rang again. He scowled at me as if I had arranged it. I went out, opened the door, and saw a woman in a gray suit and a hat with no nonsense to it. Early 30s, maybe, with clear eyes that had gone beyond worry and were now operating on will. "My name is Helen Voss," she said. "I must see Nero Wolfe. It concerns Mr. Edwin Harlan. I telephoned 10 minutes ago." I took her into the office. When she saw Kramer, she paused, but only for a beat. "That saves time," she said. Wolfe indicated the red leather chair. "Sit, Miss Voss. Since Mr. Kramer is contaminating the room already, there is no point in ceremony." She sat straight, gloves still on. "I'm Mr. Harlan's secretary. I told the police what I know, but they don't understand what matters." Kramer snorted. "Go ahead, enlighten us." She looked at Wolfe. The book was titled The Glass Room, a memoir by Daniel Varro. The publisher issued 100 signed copies in advance binding, privately distributed. Mr. Harlan received copy number 17 this morning. "Why privately?" Wolfe asked. "I don't know, but yesterday, mister." And Harlan received a note with no signature. It said, "Do not read the edition. It was prepared for you." I said, "Prepared how?" Her face tightened. "That's what I'm trying to find out. Last night he laughed at it. This morning he opened the package in his library. 20 minutes later, he was dead." Wolfe was watching her with that infuriating stillness of his, storing away tone, posture, rhythm, and every twitch she didn't know she had made. "And why?" he asked softly. "Have you come here before waiting for the police to finish?" "Because there are others." She turned to me now, maybe because I looked easier to persuade. 3 other advance copies went to people Mr. Harlan knew. 1 to a publisher, 1 to a retired judge, 1 to a man named Louis Riker. Kramer said, "Who's Riker?" She answered without looking at him. "Mr. Harlan's former business partner." They hadn't spoken in 2 years. That gave the room a new odor, and it wasn't from the orchids. Wolfe shifted in his chair. "Miss Voss, you imply that the recipients of this limited edition are linked by something besides literature." "Yes?" "What?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "I don't know." That was a lie, or near enough to one to interest me. The telephone rang. I picked it up. A man's voice, shaky and breathless, asked for Helen Voss. I covered the mouthpiece and told her. She stood, took the extension from the small table, and listened. Color went out of her face fast, like water down a drain. When she replaced the receiver, her voice was steady, only because she was forcing it. "That was the residence of Judge Corbett," she said. "Or he collapsed 10 minutes ago while reading his copy." Nobody spoke for 1 second. Then Kramer cursed, once and richly. Wolfe closed his eyes again, which for him was the equivalent of a trumpet blast. "Archie," he said, "you will go out." That was more like it. Chapter 2. Ink, Lies, and Motives. By 12:30. I was in a taxi headed downtown, with instructions from Nero Wolfe that would have sounded simple to anyone who didn't know him. "Observe everything," he had said. "Report precisely, and do not think." That last part always made me feel underappreciated. The city was doing its usual midday act. Horns, heat rising off pavement, men in hats pretending they liked their jobs. I had the address of the publishing house in my pocket. Varro and Keene, one of those outfits that printed serious books for serious people who didn't smile much. When I got there, the building looked like it had been assembled from ambition and dust. Inside, a receptionist with sharp glasses and sharper eyes asked my business. "Archie Goodwin," I said, "representing Nero Wolfe." That worked the way a key works in a good lock. Her posture shifted half an inch. "Mr. Keene is expecting questions," she said. "Follow me." I followed her down a corridor that smelled faintly of ink and stronger of nerves. She showed me into an office where a man in his 40s sat behind a desk too clean to be trusted. He had smooth hair, a careful tie, and the expression of someone who had just learned that success comes with receipts. "Goodwin," he said, standing. "I'm Charles Keene." "Congratulations," I told him. "You're having a busy morning." His mouth twitched. "If this is about Mr. Harlan—" "It is, and about a book that seems to be unpopular with its readers." He didn't sit again right away. That was interesting. "I assume the police have told you what happened." "They told me enough to come ask you why a man drops dead while reading something you published." "I didn't publish it," he said quickly. "Not yet. The edition in question was a private run." "Of 100 copies," I said. "Signed, distributed selectively." He sat now, carefully. "Yes?" "Selected by whom?" "By the author's estate." "Daniel Varro is dead," I said. "So are his secrets," Keene snapped, then caught himself. "That is, his manuscripts are handled by a trust. They made the decisions." "Convenient," I said. "Who handled production?" He hesitated, and that was worth more than a direct answer. "Our senior editor oversaw it," he said finally. "Miss Laura Bell?" "Where can I find her?" "In the building, 3rd floor." "Good. Before I go, how many complaints have you had this morning?" "None," he said. "Wrong answer," I told him. "Try again." His jaw tightened. One of the recipients, Judge Corbett, was reported ill. "Collapsed," I said. "While reading?" That shook him. Not much, but enough. "I wasn't aware of that." "Now you are. One more thing. Who did the proofreading?" "A freelancer," he said. "Name of Julian Fisk." "Where is he?" Keene looked at his desk as if the answer might be hiding under the blotter. "We haven't been able to reach him since yesterday." I smiled at him. "You're collecting quite a set." Up on the 3rd floor, Laura Bell's office had books stacked like barricades and a typewriter that looked like it had seen combat. She was in her 30s, sharp-eyed, with ink on her fingers and no patience in reserve. "You from Wolfe?" she said before I had both feet inside. "That obvious?" "You don't look like police, and you look too awake to be a publisher." I took the chair she pointed at. "Tell me about the lethal edition." She didn't like that phrase. It showed. "It's a memoir," she said. "Varro wrote it 10 years before he died. It's controversial." "Meaning?" "Names," she said. "Deals. Things people prefer to keep buried." "That would explain the guest list," I said. "Harlan, Corbett, Riker." Her eyes flicked. "You know about Riker?" "I know his name. Should I know more?" She leaned back. "The edition was commissioned by someone who wanted those copies in those hands." "Someone with a sense of drama," I said, "and possibly chemistry." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Gray stains on fingertips," I said. "2 readers down, maybe more coming. On either your book is very exciting or something on those pages isn't literature." "That's absurd," she said, but not firmly enough. "Is it?" I asked. "Who handled the physical production?" "A specialty binder," she said. "We sent the sheets out after printing." "Name?" "Larkin and Sons." "Address?" She gave it to me, then added, "Look, Mr. Goodwin, this is getting out of hand. We didn't—" "Didn't what?" "Didn't poison anyone." "I didn't say you did," I told her. "You're the one who brought it up." That landed where it should. Back on the street, I ducked into a diner on the corner, the kind with chipped cups and coffee that could take paint off a door. I ordered a sandwich and used the phone booth to call Wolfe. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "Well?" he said. "Your instructions were followed," I told him. I observed everything and thought nothing. Result, the publisher is nervous, the editor is defensive, and the proofreader is missing. "Names?" Wolfe said. I gave them to him, along with Larkin and Sons. Also, I added, the addition wasn't random. It was aimed. All recipients tied to something in Vero's memoir. Probably something expensive. Wolfe grunted. And the mechanism? Not confirmed, I said. But if I were betting, I'd say the poison is in the pages themselves. Specific ones? There was a pause. I could almost hear the gears turning behind his eyes. Archie, he said finally, return at once. Bring a copy of the book if you can procure it without being arrested. I'll do my best, I said. Anything else? Yes, eat something decent. Your voice suggests malnutrition. I hung up and looked at my sandwich. It looked back without apology. By the time I finished, the city felt different. Not louder or darker, just narrower, like something was closing in. And somewhere out there, at least one more copy of The Glassroom was waiting to be opened. Chapter 3. The Hidden Message. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was a few minutes past 3, which meant I had exactly 60 seconds to report before Nero Wolfe vanished upstairs to commune with his orchids like a benevolent dictator of petals. I went straight to the office. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes half closed, fingers pressed together, looking as if he had been born there and intended to die there without ever admitting the possibility of standing up. Well, he said. I held up the book. It wasn't much to look at. Gray binding, clean lettering, The Glassroom, Daniel Vero. If it had been sitting on a shelf, it would have been just another piece of expensive boredom. In my hand, it felt like a loaded question. Copy number 23, I said. Borrowed with charm from the publisher, who was too rattled to argue. Wolfe opened his eyes fully now. Place it on the desk. Do not touch it again. That was my plan anyway, I said, setting it down like it might bite. I gave him everything. Keen's nerves, Laura Bell's defensiveness, the missing proofreader Julian Fisk, and the binder Larkin and Sons. Wolfe listened without interrupting, which is always worse than being interrupted. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. 2 deaths, he said. 1 confirmed, 1 impending. Both while reading. Both with stained fingers. Gray, I said, like cheap ink or expensive trouble. He nodded. And the distribution was selective. The recipients share a connection, unknown but significant. Vero's memoir, I said. Names, deals, buried things. Wolfe's lips moved a fraction. Yes? A book that accuses, a list that implicates, and a method that kills. Efficient, I said. He ignored that. Archie, open it. I looked at the book, then at him. You just told me not to touch it. I have reconsidered, he said. Use a handkerchief. I did. I wrapped my fingers carefully and opened the cover. The pages were crisp, expensive, and innocent-looking, which didn't improve my mood. First impression? Wolfe asked. It reads like a book, I said. I was hoping for something more dramatic. Turn to page 47. I blinked. Why 47? Because, Wolfe said patiently, it is approximately where a writer of mediocre discipline begins to reveal what he should have concealed. I flipped through. The paper had a faint, dry whisper to it. Page 47 was halfway into a chapter titled Accounts Rendered. Read a paragraph, Wolfe said. I did. It was the usual memoir stuff. Names, dates, a deal involving a shipping company, and something that smelled like it had been washed too many times. Anything unusual? Wolfe asked. Besides the prose? No. Continue, he said. I turned a few more pages, then paused. Hold it. What? The paper, I said. Feels different. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Explain. Not much, I said, but these pages, 47 to maybe 50, feel smoother, slightly. Odor? I leaned in, cautious. Nothing obvious. Maybe a faint metallic note. Wolfe closed his eyes again, and this time it wasn't dismissal. It was calculation. The toxin, he said, is likely embedded in specific leaves, applied selectively. Meaning you only die if you read the right part, I said. Or the wrong part, he corrected. I flipped further. There's more. Look at this. Describe. Archie, I am not clairvoyant. The text, I said. Certain words, slightly darker. Not enough to notice unless you're looking. Pattern? Wolfe asked. Maybe, I said. I'd need time to mark them. You will not mark them, he snapped. You will observe. I grinned. There's that word again. Before he could reply, the telephone rang. I picked up. It was Inspector Kramer, and he sounded like he had swallowed a handful of nails. Goodwin, he barked, where are you? Home, I said. Behaving? Stay there, he said. I'm coming over, and don't touch that book. I looked at Wolfe. He raised an eyebrow. Too late, I said into the phone. Kramer hung up on me, which is his way of saying goodbye. I turned back to Wolfe. He'll be here in 10 minutes. Good, Wolfe said. By then, I shall have arranged my thoughts. That's fast, I said. They were already arranged, he said. I am merely permitting you to catch up. I went back to the book, carefully turning pages with the handkerchief. The pattern, if it was one, wasn't obvious, but it was there. Certain words, certain lines, just a shade darker, like they had been whispered instead of spoken. Wolfe, I said, this isn't just poison. No, he said, it is communication. I looked up. A message? A system, he said. The victims were not merely readers. They were recipients. Recipients of what? That, Wolfe said, is what you will discover. The doorbell rang. I went to answer it, and when I came back with Kramer in tow, the room felt tighter, like it had decided to hold its breath. Kramer didn't sit. He never did, not when he was this wound up. Third one, he said. That stopped everything. Who? I asked. Old Louis Riker, he said. Didn't die. Not yet, but he's in bad shape. Same symptoms. Same damn book. Wolfe nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already decided. Excellent, he said. Kramer stared at him. Excellent? Yes, Wolfe said calmly. We now know that the pattern is consistent. I looked at the book, then at Wolfe. A weapon that killed only certain readers. A message hidden in plain sight. And somewhere in that neat little system was a mind that had planned it all. Patiently. Precisely, and with just enough daylight to make it look harmless. Archie, Wolfe said, you will go out again. I sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Chapter 4. Daylight Trap. By 5 o'clock, Nero Wolfe had reached a decision, which in his case meant the rest of us were expected to rearrange reality to fit it. I was at my desk, trying to make sense of notes that looked like they had been written by a nervous spider, when Wolfe announced it. Archie, he said, we will have guests. That word from Wolfe is never casual. It means chairs moved, tempers tested, and someone about to regret their life choices. Dinner guests? I asked. Should I warn Fritz? No, Wolfe said. They will not eat. They will talk. Even worse, I said. He ignored me. Telephone Mr. Kramer. Inform him that if he wishes to arrest the culprit in the matter of the Vero edition, he will present himself here at 6:30. Present himself, I repeated. Like a gift. Like a man with a duty, Wolfe said. I made the call. Kramer didn't like it. That was predictable. You've got something? He demanded. I've got Wolfe, I said. That's usually enough. He grunted. 6:30, he said, and hung up before I could improve his mood. Next came the invitations. Laura Bell arrived first, sharp and guarded, carrying herself like someone who had decided not to be frightened, but hadn't quite convinced her hands. Charles Keene followed, pale and precise, as if he had spent the last few hours trying to calculate how much trouble could cost him. Then came a man I hadn't met before, thin, restless, with eyes that didn't stay still long enough to settle anywhere. "Julian Fisk?" I said. "That's right," he said. "You've been looking for me." "Only in a professional capacity," I told him. Last was Helen Voss, who had traded her morning composure for something harder. She nodded to me, then took her seat without a word. Wolfe let them settle. He was in his chair, of course, planted like a monument, hands folded, eyes half-lidded. The room carried its usual scent of orchids, calm and expensive, which didn't match the tension that had taken up residence. At 6:30 sharp, the bell rang again. Kramer came in with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins behind him, both of them wearing expressions that said they expected nonsense and were prepared to object to it. "Everyone here?" Kramer asked. "Regrettably," Wolfe said. Kramer stayed on his feet. "All right, Wolfe, start talking." Wolfe inclined his head. "We are assembled because 3 individuals, Mr. Harlan, Judge Corbett, and Mr. Riker, have suffered identical fates upon reading specific copies of a privately distributed edition of The Glassroom. The method, while subtle, is now clear." Kramer folded his arms. "Let's hear it." "The pages," Wolfe said, "were treated with a toxin. Not all pages, only selected ones. The application was precise, likely done during or after binding." Keene shifted. "That's impossible. Our processes are irrelevant," Wolfe said. "The fact remains." Laura Bell leaned forward. "But why those people? Why those copies?" Wolfe's gaze moved slowly across the room. "Because those copies were not distributed at random. They were assigned." Silence settled in, heavy and interested. I moved to the side table, where the book sat. Copy number 23. Harmless looking. Patient. "Archie," Wolfe said, "you will assist." That was my cue. And I picked up the book, carefully, and walked it around the room, stopping in front of each of them. "Take a look," I said. "Don't touch the pages. Just look." They did. Keene barely glanced. Laura Bell studied it like she expected it to confess. Fisk stared too long, then looked away first. Helen Voss didn't look at it at all. That was worth a note. When I returned to my desk, Wolfe spoke again. "There is another element," he said. "The text itself. Certain words are printed more heavily. They form a pattern." "A code?" Kramer said. "A message," Wolfe replied. "One that would be recognized only by those for whom it was intended." "Recognized how?" Kramer asked. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "Archie?" I shrugged. "Still working on that part." Kramer snorted. "That's helpful." Wolfe raised a hand. "Patience. The essential point is this. The victims were linked by a shared past, one involving Mr. Vero and certain financial arrangements." Keene went rigid. "That's speculation." "No," Wolfe said calmly. "It is inference, and a correct one." Laura Bell turned to Keene. "What is he talking about?" Keene didn't answer. Fisk shifted in his chair. "Look, I just proofread the manuscript. I didn't—" "You disappeared," I said. "That's more than proofreading." "I had reasons," he snapped. "Of course you did," I said. "Everyone here does." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which for him is the equivalent of standing up and shouting. "The killer," he said, "is among us." That landed the way it should. Kramer straightened. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Then say it," Kramer said. "Who is it?" Wolfe looked at him, then at the others, I letting the silence stretch until it was doing work. "Not yet," he said. Kramer's face darkened. "Don't play games with me." "I do not play games," Wolfe said. "I conclude them." I stepped forward. In the meantime, I said, we're going to try a small experiment. I picked up the book again and held it out. Someone here, I said, knows exactly which pages matter. The room tightened. Let's see who reaches for them. No one moved for 3 seconds. Then one of them did. Fast, too fast. And Kramer was already stepping in. Chapter 5. The Lethal Edition. Revealed the one who moved was Julian Fisk. He didn't lunge like a stage villain. He moved the way frightened men move, quick, involuntary, before their brains can catch up and invent dignity. His hand shot toward the open book on the side table, not toward the cover, but toward the middle, the precise middle, where pages 47 through 50 lay waiting like a row of loaded chambers. Pearlie Stebbins got there first. He seized Fisk's wrist, twisted it neatly, and the book tipped sideways onto the carpet without opening any farther. Fisk let out a sound that wasn't quite a curse and wasn't far from a whine. Kramer barked, "Hold him!" Pearlie didn't need the advice. The room stayed very still after that. Laura Bell had gone white around the mouth. Charles Keene looked as if someone had just presented him with an invoice from hell. Helen Voss sat perfectly straight, her hands folded too tightly in her lap, the only one who didn't look surprised enough. Wolfe, of course, did not move at all. He merely looked at Fisk as though he were an insect that had finally identified itself by crawling into the sugar bowl. "Mr. Fisk," Wolfe said, "you have excellent reflexes and poor judgment." Fisk swallowed. I was only trying to prevent an accident," I offered. "That's noble, especially since you knew exactly which pages were dangerous." "I didn't know that." "No?" Wolfe's voice was mild, which made it worse. "Then why did your hand go to that portion of the book and not another? Why not the title page? Why not the end papers? Why not nothing?" Fisk's eyes darted to the door. I to Kramer, to me, then back to Wolfe. He was looking for an exit, verbal or physical, and not finding either. Kramer planted both fists on Wolfe's desk. "All right, enough. You've got him grabbing for the book. That's something. Now give me the rest." Wolfe nodded once. "Gladly. Sit down, Mr. Kramer. Your posturing is wearying." Kramer remained standing. Wolfe accepted that with a blink and turned his head slightly toward me. "Archie, the papers." I handed him the sheet we had put together an hour earlier from my notes, Wolfe's deductions, and one very useful telephone call to Larkin and Sons, the binders. Wolfe scarcely glanced at it. He didn't need to. It was for effect, and Wolfe valued effect the way some men value loaded dice. "The matter," he said, "began years ago with Daniel Varro, whose memoir, The Glass Room, was not merely literary confession, but a ledger in narrative form. He recorded a series of illicit transactions involving rare books, forged editions, manipulated appraisals, and fraudulent charitable donations used to conceal the proceeds. 3 men benefited directly: Edwin Harlan, Judge Corbett, and Louis Riker. Keene made a strangled sound. "That's impossible." "It is precise," Wolfe said. "Varro preserved letters. Mr. Goodwin found references in the manuscript notes at your office, and Miss Bell, unwittingly helpful, confirmed that sections concerning those transactions had been restored to the text after earlier editorial cuts." Laura Bell turned to Keene sharply. "You told me those restorations came from the trust." Keene licked his lips. "That's what I was told." "By whom?" Wolfe asked. Keene did not answer. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room had turned to Fisk. I said, "The missing proofreader had access to the restored text, the page proofs, and the physical layout. He also had the one thing everyone else kept pretending not to know, exactly which recipients had reason to panic if Varro's memoir reached print." Fisk shook his head hard. No, that's not—" Wolfe lifted a finger. "Do not interrupt. Your lies are pedestrian." That shut him. Wolfe went on. The poison was applied after printing, before distribution, on selected leaves in selected copies only. Larkin and Sons confirmed that one individual collected the unbound sheets personally for final correction before the copies were returned for binding. That individual signed the receipt as an agent of the publisher. The signature was false, but the clerk remembered the man because he argued over gloves. I couldn't help it. A memorable quirk. Wolfe ignored me. Mr. Fisk had worked as a copy preparer before becoming a freelance proofreader. He knew enough about paper treatment and enough chemistry to use a contact toxin in fine powder suspended in sizing solution, nearly invisible when dry, harmless in casual handling, but active when transferred repeatedly from fingertips to lips or cigarettes. The victims were all habitual page moisteners. Kramer grunted. The M.E. found traces on Harlan's cigar and Corbett's pipe stem. Precisely, Wolfe said. The deaths were made to resemble natural collapse until pattern and distribution made that untenable. Helen Voss spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. But why? Why kill them now? Wolfe turned to her. Because the memoir was going to expose them, and because Mr. Fisk had his own grievance. Fisk's face changed then, not to innocence, to anger. Real anger, the kind that had been fed and rehearsed and justified in private. They ruined him, he said. Nobody had to ask who. My father, Fisk said, looking at no one and everyone. He authenticated books for Harlan and Riker, honest work. Then one of their forgeries came apart, and they pinned it on him. Corbett made sure the case died before it got to court, but my father's name was finished. He drank himself to death inside a year. There it was. Revenge at last, in a suit that fit the period and the room. Laura Bell whispered, "My God." Fisk gave a brittle laugh. Varro wrote it all down. He was there. He helped them, then hated them for it. When I saw those pages in proof, I knew. I knew what they had done and that they'd never pay. Not really? So you arranged a private justice, Wolfe said. Fisk swung toward him. Justice? No, correction. Pfui, Wolfe snapped. You killed one man, likely two, and would have killed a third. That is not correction. It is vanity armed with poison. Fisk's shoulders sagged then. Not in surrender exactly, but because the structure holding him up had cracked. Kramer stepped in at once. Julian Fisk, you're under arrest for murder and attempted murder. He nodded to Purley. Take him? Purley moved him toward the hall. Fisk didn't resist. At the door, he turned once, maybe for Laura Bell, maybe for the room, maybe for the story he had told himself. No one helped him keep it. When they were gone, the silence loosened. Keene sank into a chair as if his bones had resigned. Or this will destroy the house. Not if you survive it intelligently, Wolfe said. Withdraw the edition, notify the authorities, and cease lying to your editor. Laura Bell gave Keene a look that promised future weather. Helen Voss rose. Mr. Wolfe, she said, I withheld one thing. I sighed. There's always one more. She met Wolfe's eyes. Mr. Harlan received the warning note because I sent it. Kramer stopped in the doorway. You what? I knew enough to be frightened, she said. I found correspondence in his files. Varro, Riker, Corbett. I didn't know about Fisk, and I didn't know how the book would kill, but I knew the edition had been prepared to frighten them. I thought a warning might stop him from opening it. Wolfe nodded. You should have come sooner. Yes, she said simply. Kramer looked from her to Wolfe, waited, and then grunted. We'll talk later. He left. That made it just us again. The office, the settled evening, the brownstone holding its shape around the case the way it always did. From upstairs, faint and clean, came the scent of Wolfe's orchids. Fritz moved somewhere in the kitchen. The city beyond the windows kept grinding its gears. I leaned against my desk. So that's that. Wolfe settled deeper into his chair. Yes? A lethal book, a dead collector, a sick judge, a ruined proofreader, and a publisher who may now discover honesty as a business strategy. Yes. I looked at the book on the carpet. You know, for years people have been saying books are dangerous. Nice to see somebody finally put in the effort. Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie. Sir? Remove that object from my office. I grinned, got a handkerchief, and obeyed. Some cases end with gunfire. Some end with tears. This one ended with gloves, evidence bags, and Wolfe ringing for beer. That, for our house, counted as perfect order restored.
If you like our story, please like, share, and subscribe.